So I was actually working on a different video, but I just watched Tilde's most recent video and I thought I might make a brief response. Not to actually correct anything he said in the video, but just to examine some of the underlying causes for the problems he's talking about. So the video basically explores the academic bias in the American university system, which shows a huge difference in registered Republican and registered Democratic professors and faculty members. Now, the overall ratio of Democrat to Republican faculty members arrived at is about 10 to 1, which is a big problem given that the split between Democrats and Republicans across the country is almost 1 to 1 according to the last election. But what's actually causing this? One of the things that stood out to me the most in Tilde's video is that the political ratio of professorial rank and professorial age seems to match perfectly. The ratio seems to change at about the same rate, and this would suggest to me at least that as a faculty member is progressing through their career, their ability to be promoted isn't really being hampered by their political leanings. In other words, this political bias doesn't seem to be the result of institutional systemic bias, from the academic system itself. Well, I think one of the first places to look is at the universities themselves. I mean, look at the actual names we've got here: Caltech, Brown, Johns Hopkins, Columbia, Boston, MIT, Yale. The best universities are usually located in fairly large cities. And if that's the case, if that is part of the problem, then it's actually a problem, I think, that goes far deeper than academic bias. This is something that I've actually been thinking about a lot since the US election last year. I was watching the live coverage of the election on the Guardian website, which I know they're not a great news outlet, but they do have some of the best graphs and stuff when live elections are going on. What really piqued my interest about watching the Guardian's electoral map was that it had the option to switch between state and county. Take New York, for example. New York is a blue state. Everybody knows New York is a blue state. However, when you switch to county view, except for New York City and a few other small pockets, New York State basically turns red. It seems like what's best for sexually liberated Carrie Bradshaw living out her, Sex and the City lifestyle is probably not good for the vast majority of New Yorkers that live outside the city limits. And if we zoom out, we see that this trend is basically the same across the entire country. It looks like there's a lot of blue on this map, but if we switch to county view, the entire country basically turns red, except for major city and coastal areas. And this isn't limited to America either. We basically see exactly the same thing in, the UK's Brexit vote. What was good for Londoners was not necessarily good for the rest of Englanders. Here's a map that I found which shows United States population density. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to recolor the map with red and blue to match the electoral map. The result is actually fairly similar. It's not perfect, but it's pretty close. It would seem as though the key determining factor between someone being liberal or conservative basically comes down to the population density of the area that they live in. For me at least, that has really raised a few red flags with these people that want to get rid of the electoral college system. I get it, that they think that it obscures their individual vote and gives, gives other people's vote more political weight. They'd be much happier with one person, one vote. That to them seems a lot more fair. And I guess you could make the argument that it is, but have a look at this map that I found on Business Insider, which states half of the US population lives in the shaded counties. I get it, you don't like the fact that the Electoral College weights some votes more than others, but ask yourself, is it better or worse than a system that would see these, small handfuls of counties basically have a majority of political power over the entire country. I mean, as I said, what's good for Carrie Bradshaw in Manhattan isn't necessarily good for a milk farmer living in upstate New York. Changes to that system could mean that he gets ignored by the democratic system even more than he already is. Now, I guess whether you agree or disagree is kind of besides the point. You know, maybe you like the Electoral College, maybe you like the Westminster system that Tildia and myself live under, or maybe you're really in favour of one person, one vote. It's kind of irrelevant. The point is that the underlying causes of the bias that we're looking at reaches far beyond the walls of academia. And that kind of raises the question, how do we actually go about fixing it? I mean, if universities do have a severe left-wing bias, and it's largely in part because these top universities are located in high population density areas, and high population density areas are more left-leaning, then what can you actually do to fix these problems? I mean, I guess the most obvious things are, decentralization and, a more uniform population density across the country, but that's just not how people actually function at a civilizational level. People tend to group together to form cities. It's just how they operate. It's entirely possible that this left-wing bias in academia is just an emergent property of how human beings naturally behave, given, the scale of civilization. Look, I wish it wasn't so, but I'm looking at this and it seems to be just another one of those things where we recognize a clear problem here, but it may well be beyond our purview to correct.